The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed a cruel, indifferent tune at 2 in the morning. They illuminated Hailey Cooper's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, and the single terrifying piece of paper clutched in her trembling hands. It was a medical bill for $47,000, more money than she had seen in her entire life. Through the glass partition, her mother, Leah, was a fragile silhouette tethered to a web of beeping machines. Each rhythmic pulse was a reminder that time was a luxury they no longer had. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, a death sentence delivered with clinical sympathy. Without the experimental chemotherapy, Leah had 6 months, tops. With it, a chance. A chance that cost $200,000. Hailey didn't even have $200. The last 8 months had been a free fall into hell. The design firm where she'd poured her talent and passion had folded overnight. 2 weeks later, Leah's diagnosis had landed like a bomb. Savings evaporated. Prized possessions were sold. 127 job applications had been sent into the void, met with crushing silence. Now, her diet consisted of instant noodles and the bitter taste of despair. She was drowning. As she stumbled out of the hospital and into the pre-dawn chill, her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost ignored it. "Miss Cooper?" The voice was female, professional, and cold as ice. "My name is Jennifer Ross, executive assistant to Mr. Andrew Davis. Mr. Davis would like to meet with you today at 2 p.m. A car will be sent to your address." Hailey's exhausted mind struggled to connect the dots. Andrew Davis. The name was vaguely familiar, a whisper from the world of finance she never paid attention to. "What is this about?" "Mr. Davis prefers to discuss matters in person," the voice replied smoothly. "It will be a proposal that could resolve your current financial difficulties." Hailey's heart stopped. How? How could this stranger know the intimate, crushing details of her desperation? Before she could form a question, the line went dead. At 1:55 p.m., a black limousine, sleek and predatory, pulled up in front of her crumbling apartment building. It was an alien spaceship landing in a forgotten world. Hailey, wearing the only professional outfit she owned, a blouse and slacks that now hung loosely on her frame, stepped inside on shaky legs, with no idea she was stepping into a different life. The car stopped in front of a skyscraper of glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline. The Davis Tower, as in the Davis Banking Corporation. Nausea churned in her stomach. What could a man who commanded empires possibly want with a girl who had nothing? Jennifer Ross guided her through silent, opulent corridors to a set of imposing mahogany doors. "Mr. Davis will see you now." The doors swung open, revealing an office that was more of a sky palace. And standing before a panoramic window, his perfect profile silhouetted against the New York City sky, was the man who was about to make the most insane and most tempting proposal of her life. He turned. And as Andrew Davis's dark, amber eyes met hers, Hailey Cooper forgot how to breathe. "Miss Cooper." Andrew Davis's voice was deep and controlled, but it held an electric current that made every nerve in Hailey's body stand at attention. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply gestured to the leather chair in front of his massive desk. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Hailey obeyed, feeling like a pawn on a king's chessboard. He sat opposite her, the vast expanse of polished wood between them, a symbol of the chasm separating their worlds. He studied her with an unnerving intensity that made her want to shrink away, but she held his gaze. Pain had taught her many things, and one of them was how to hold her ground, even when it was crumbling beneath her. "I've done my research," he began, his tone crisp, opening a thin file on his desk. "Hailey Cooper, 25, Parsons graduate, with honors. 8 months unemployed. Mother diagnosed with aggressive leukemia. Accumulated debts of $89,000, and growing." Each word was a clinical, precise stab. The humiliation was so intense, it felt like a physical heat on her cheeks. "If your goal is to humiliate me, Mr. Davis, I'm well aware of my situation." For the first time, something flickered in his amber eyes, a spark of respect. "I'm not humiliating you," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm establishing that I know exactly what you need, and I can give it to you." Hailey straightened her spine. "In exchange for what?" Andrew leaned back, those piercing eyes never leaving hers. "I want you to carry my child." The world stopped. The city noise outside the window vanished. The only sound was the frantic, panicked thumping of her own heart. "I'm sorry. What?" "I require an heir," he continued, his tone as calm as if he were discussing a stock portfolio. "I have no interest in the emotional complications of marriage. I want a clean, contractual arrangement that benefits us both." He laid out the terms with the chilling precision of a surgeon. "You provide me with a child. In return, I will settle all of your debts, fund your mother's complete medical care, including the experimental treatment, provide you with luxury housing for the duration of the pregnancy, and upon the birth of a healthy child, you will receive $500,000 and a permanent design position in my company's real estate division." She was on her feet before she even realized she had moved. "You're insane." He rose as well, but kept the desk between them, a respectful distance. "I am the sanest man you will ever meet. Think logically, Hailey. You are drowning. Your mother is dying. I am offering you a lifeboat." He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "The full contract. You have 48 hours to decide." Hailey stared at the folder, as if it were a venomous snake. "And if I say no?" "Then you walk out that door. You return to your collapsing life and you watch your mother die, knowing you didn't do everything in your power to save her." The casual cruelty of his words was a blade twisting in her gut, made all the more painful because it was the absolute truth. With a trembling hand, she picked up the folder. It felt impossibly heavy. I need to think," she stammered. "Naturally," he said. He finally moved from behind the desk, and as he drew nearer, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the subtle, expensive scent of cedar and mint. "But Hailey?" She looked up, trapped by his gaze. "Don't let your pride stop you from saving the person you love most." She walked out of that office on unsteady legs, the contract burning in her hands, a single question pounding in her head. How do you put a price on your soul? Hailey didn't sleep. For 48 hours, she existed in a waking nightmare, fueled by black coffee and the cold, hard print of the contract. She read it until the words blurred. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, a document that stripped away all humanity and left only the transaction. The carrier agrees to relinquish all parental rights upon birth. The benefactor will have sole and absolute custody. A healthy child is defined as... She was an incubator, a vessel. The contract was cold, efficient, and utterly soul-crushing. She visited Leah at the hospital. Her mother was weaker today, her skin more translucent, her smile a little more fragile. The head nurse, a kind woman named Cindy, pulled Hailey into the hallway. "Honey, I need to be honest," Cindy said, her eyes full of a pity Hailey couldn't stand. "The standard chemo isn't working. If we don't try something more aggressive, and soon..." She didn't have to finish the sentence. The clock was ticking, loud and merciless. That night, alone in her tiny apartment, Hailey stared at the eviction notice on her counter. The power was scheduled to be shut off tomorrow. She was at the end of her rope. There were no miracles coming. There was no white knight. There was only Andrew Davis and his impossible, monstrous proposal. Her ex-fiancé, Marcus, showed up the next day, oozing false concern. He'd heard she was in trouble. He offered to help. His help was a condescending offer of a $5,000 loan. "I need $200,000, Marcus," she said, her voice flat. The color drained from his face. "Hailey, be reasonable. Get out of my house." After he was gone, the choice became brutally clear. It wasn't a choice at all. It was a sentence. Her pride, or her mother's life. She picked up the phone. "Jennifer Ross." The assistant's voice was as crisp as ever. Hailey took a deep, shuddering breath. "This is Hailey Cooper. I accept." A beat of silence. "Excellent. Mr. Davis will expect you tomorrow at 9 a.m. to sign the documents. A car will be sent." The line went dead. Hailey dropped the phone, her hand covering her mouth as a silent, wrenching sob was torn from her chest. She had just sold her future, her body, her child. Across the city, in a penthouse overlooking the glittering lights of Manhattan, Andrew Davis stood by a window, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. For the first time in a very long time, a flicker of doubt, a feeling dangerously close to guilt, stirred within him. He crushed it without a second thought. This was a business deal, nothing more. The conference room at Davis Tower was glacial. 3 lawyers in identical grey suits, a stone-faced notary, and Jennifer Ross, a sentinel of corporate efficiency, formed a silent tribunal. At the head of the long, polished table sat Andrew Davis, a king presiding over his court. Hailey walked in, feeling like a lamb to the slaughter. She was acutely aware of her simple clothes, of the invisible stain of desperation she felt she carried. All eyes were on her. She wasn't a person. She was an asset being acquired. "Sign on each yellow tab, please," the notary said, her voice devoid of any emotion as she pushed the thick stack of papers toward Hailey. There were 47 tabs, 47 small yellow flags marking the surrender of her life. As she signed, her hand trembling slightly, she could feel Andrew's eyes on her. She refused to look at him. She focused on the ink, on the crisp scratch of the pen, on the act of signing away her future. With each signature, she felt a small piece of herself die. The clause relinquishing all parental rights was the worst. She had to pause, closing her eyes for a brief second before forcing her hand to move. "It is done," the notary announced, stamping the final page with a heavy, final thud. "Congratulations, Miss Cooper. You are now officially under contract." It sounded like a prison sentence. Jennifer slid a black credit card and a set of keys across the table. "Your first appointment at the fertility clinic is tomorrow at 10 a.m. These are the keys to your new apartment. Your mother's treatment has been scheduled to begin the day after tomorrow." Efficient, mechanical, inhumane. The lawyers and staff filed out, leaving Hailey and Andrew alone in the cavernous, silent room. "I need to know one thing," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have hired a professional surrogate. Why a desperate, unemployed designer?" A flicker of something, vulnerability, crossed his face before it was gone. "Because a professional does it for the money," he said, his voice low. "You are doing this for love, for your mother." He held her gaze. "And I want my child to be carried by someone who understands what that means, even if I do not." The raw, unexpected honesty stole the air from her lungs. Before she could respond, he stood. "Your apartment is on Park Avenue, fully furnished. Jennifer is at your disposal for anything you need." He was already at the door, retreating back into his fortress of control. "I will see you at the clinic tomorrow." "Andrew," she called out, the name feeling strange on her tongue. He paused, his back still to her. "Have you really never loved anyone?" The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "No," he finally answered, his voice barely a whisper. "And it's better that way." The apartment was obscene. A palace of marble and glass with a view of Central Park that belonged on a postcard. Hailey walked through the empty, perfectly designed rooms, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She had never felt more alone in her life. That night, lying in a bed large enough for 6 people, she received a text. "I hope the apartment is suitable. Rest. Tomorrow we begin. Andrew Davis." She stared at the cold, formal words. Then she placed a hand on her still flat stomach. Somewhere in the near future, a life would begin inside her. Andrew Davis's child. It was supposed to be a transaction, but as she closed her eyes, She felt the terrifying, unmistakable stirrings of something far more complicated. She felt a connection, and it terrified her. The fertility clinic was a world of hushed tones, soft lighting, and the faint, sterile scent of hope. A kind-faced, gray-haired man named Dr. Wilson greeted them, his gentle smile a stark contrast to the cold reality of their situation. "We'll need to run a full panel on both of you today," he said calmly. "Mr. Davis, you'll be in room 3. Miss Cooper, room 5. The clinical separation was a jolt. This was how their child would be conceived, not in a moment of passion, but in separate, sterile rooms, their bodies reduced to a collection of data points. This wasn't intimacy, it was science, and it felt infinitely more invasive. Hailey glanced at Andrew before he was led away. She saw a tension in his shoulders, a rigidity she hadn't noticed before. Was the billionaire nervous? The next 2 hours were a blur of invasive questions and cold instruments. Hailey felt less like a person and more like livestock being assessed for breeding. Medical history, blood draws, ultrasounds. It was dehumanizing. Afterward, Dr. Wilson sat with her, his expression full of a genuine kindness that broke through her defenses. "I know this is unorthodox," he said softly. "My job is simply to ensure you and the baby are healthy. I'm not here to judge." "Everyone is judging," Hailey whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I'm judging myself." "You are doing this to save your mother," the doctor replied, his voice firm but gentle. "There is nothing more noble than that." The simple validation was all it took. The tears she had been holding back for days finally fell. She found Andrew in the waiting room, looking just as emotionally drained as she felt. Dr. Wilson called them both into his office. "Good news," he announced, looking at their charts. "You are both in excellent health. Miss Cooper, your hormone levels are perfect. Mr. Davis, your analysis is exceptional. I'd say we have a very high chance of success on the first attempt." He paused, looking at them over his glasses. "I am required to ask, have you considered natural conception?" Hailey choked on air. Andrew went rigid beside her. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice cold as steel. "We will proceed with IVF, as planned." Later, standing beside his car in the parking garage, the silence between them was awkward and charged. They were no longer just business partners. They were biological collaborators, a fact that was both undeniable and deeply unsettling. "The embryo transfer will be in 2 weeks," Andrew said finally, breaking the silence. "Until then, take care of yourself." "You too," she replied without thinking. The words, so simple and automatic, seemed to startle him. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if no one had ever bothered to wish him well before. He gave a short, stiff nod and got into his car, leaving her alone in the quiet garage. That night, Hailey received a text from him. It was the first one that wasn't about logistics. "How is your mother?" She typed and deleted 7 different replies before settling on one. "She's strong, like her daughter." It took 5 minutes for him to respond. When he did, it was with a question that made her heart give a strange, inexplicable flutter. "My daughter? Have you decided on the gender already?" And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Hailey smiled. "You're pregnant." 2 weeks after the embryo transfer, Dr. Wilson's words hung in the air, both a verdict and a miracle. He pointed to a number on a screen. "Your HCG levels are excellent. Congratulations." Hailey stared at the number, her mind struggling to process the reality. Pregnant. A life was growing inside her. Andrew Davis's child. The room tilted slightly. Beside her, Andrew, who had insisted on being there, was pale. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice strangely hoarse. "Absolutely," Dr. Wilson confirmed, handing Hailey a folder. "We'll do the first ultrasound in 3 weeks to confirm the heartbeat. Until then, Miss Cooper, here are your prenatal vitamins and a list of restrictions." In the elevator ride down, the silence was deafening. "Are you okay?" Andrew finally asked. his voice tight. "I'm growing a human being for a man I barely know," she snapped, the sarcasm a thin veil for her panic. "I'm just peachy." He slammed the emergency stop button. The elevator jolted to a halt, trapping them in the small, enclosed space. "Look at me," he commanded. She reluctantly met his gaze. His eyes were intense, a storm of an emotion she couldn't name. "I am not a stranger, not anymore. We are partners in this, and I will be there every step of the way." "Why?" she challenged. "The contract doesn't require—" "To hell with the contract," he cut her off, the force of his words surprising them both. He gestured vaguely toward her still flat stomach. "That is my child, and you are carrying him. That matters." It was the most human thing she had ever heard him say. Before she could respond, he released the button, and the elevator resumed its descent. "I'll have Jennifer clear my schedule," he said, the CEO mask firmly back in place. "All prenatal appointments are a priority. I will be at every single one." The first trimester was a miserable blur of morning sickness, crushing fatigue, and a sudden violent aversion to coffee. One morning at 7 a.m., her doorbell rang. It was Andrew, looking awkward and out of place, holding a paper bag. "I read that ginger helps with nausea," he said, handing her a box of freshly baked ginger biscuits. "You baked?" she asked, incredulous. "No," he admitted. "Jennifer researched recipes and a chef made them. But the sentiment was mine." It was so absurdly Andrew, delegating an act of care, that Hailey laughed, a real, genuine laugh for the first time in days. "Thank you." He lingered in the doorway. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door wider. It was the first time he had been to her new apartment. He looked around, taking in the personal touches she'd added. Photos of Leah on the fridge, her design sketches pinned to a corkboard, a soft, worn quilt draped over the sofa. "It's cozy," he said, as if the word were a foreign concept. "You say that like it's strange." "It is," he admitted, a vulnerable note in his voice. "My apartment looks like a hotel. This looks like a home." They fell into a new, tentative rhythm. He would appear with bizarre snacks to satisfy her sudden cravings, pickles and ice cream at 11 p.m., or accompany her on slow walks through Central Park. They were slowly, awkwardly, building something that resembled a friendship, until the night she woke up to a terrifying discovery. Blood, panic, absolute and icy, seized her. She called him, her voice choked with sobs. "I'm bleeding." "Oh God, Andrew, I'm losing the baby." "I'm on my way," he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in her storm. "Don't move." He was there in 12 minutes, breaking at least 5 traffic laws to do it. He swept her up into his arms without asking and carried her to the car, racing to the hospital where Dr. Wilson met them. In the back of the car, Hailey gripped his hand, her knuckles white. "What if—" she whispered, unable to finish the thought. "Don't!" he said fiercely, his fingers tightening around hers with a strength that betrayed his own terror. "It's going to be okay." But as they sped through the sleeping city, she realized with a jolt that he was just as terrified as she was. When had this baby become more than just a clause in a contract for him too? The ultrasound room was dark and cold. Hailey lay on the examination table, her hand clutching Andrew's, her knuckles white. He stood beside her, a rigid statue of anxiety, his eyes locked on the blank screen. The bleeding had been minor, what Dr. Wilson had called spotting. But the fear it had ignited was all-consuming. The doctor moved the transducer over her still flat stomach. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Hailey's own heart. She held her breath, bracing for the worst. And then a sound. A rapid, rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh filled the room. It was the most beautiful sound Hailey had ever heard. "And there we are," Dr. Wilson said, a warm smile in his voice. "A strong, steady heartbeat. 145 beats per minute. Absolutely perfect." A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped Hailey's lips. On the screen, a tiny pulsating speck of light blinked in the darkness. Their baby. Not the baby. Not the heir. Their baby. "It's so small," Andrew murmured, his voice filled with a raw, unguarded awe she had never heard before. "The size of a blueberry," Dr. Wilson confirmed, "but perfectly healthy. The bleeding was likely just late implantation. Nothing to worry about." Hailey couldn't look away from the screen. In the moment she heard that tiny, galloping heartbeat, everything changed. This was no longer an abstract concept or a contractual obligation. This was a life. Her child. The ride back was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. Not awkward or tense, but full of a shared, unspoken reverence. "I didn't expect," Andrew began, his voice trailing off. "Expect what?" she prompted softly. "To feel this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward her stomach. "Anything. I thought it would just be a transaction." But hearing that heartbeat, he didn't need to finish. She understood completely. In the weeks that followed, a new Andrew emerged. He became obsessed, devouring books on pregnancy and fetal development. He showed up with an enormous, serpentine pregnancy pillow, organic prenatal vitamins that cost a fortune, and announced he'd hired her a personal nutritionist. "Andrew, you're going overboard," Hailey laughed, though she was secretly touched by his frantic, over-the-top care. "I am ensuring optimal conditions for the asset's development," he replied, his tone formal, but his eyes betrayed a deeper, more personal concern. One evening he came over with something different, a book of baby names. "I thought," he began, his tone hesitant, "that we could, if you wanted to, choose one together." Hailey's throat tightened. "I thought you would decide. You have sole custody, the contract says." "It's your child too, Hailey," he interrupted gently. "For the next 7 months and in a way, forever. You deserve a voice." It was a turning point. They spent the evening on her sofa, laughing at ridiculous names, debating classic versus modern, his usual guarded demeanor melting away. It was easy. It was fun. "I always dreamed of naming my daughter Leah," Hailey said softly, without thinking. "After my mother and grandmother." Andrew grew quiet. "Leah is a beautiful name." He paused. "And if it's a boy?" She smiled, a real tremulous smile. "I've always loved the name Matthew." "Matthew," he tested the name on his tongue. "Matthew Andrew Davis. Leah Hailey Davis." They looked at each other, and something profound and unspoken passed between them. This had become dangerously, beautifully real. That night, Hailey woke at 3 a.m., a common occurrence now. She texted him, a simple complaint about heartburn. His reply was immediate. "Warm milk, and sleep propped up on pillows. It will pass." "You're still awake," she typed. "Always." "Why?" The pause before his reply was longer this time. "Because when I close my eyes, all I can hear is that heartbeat. And it scares me how much it matters." Hailey stared at the message until the screen went dark. They were in uncharted territory now, a place of shared fear and burgeoning hope that no contract could ever define. The 12-week scan was supposed to be a routine milestone. Hailey was just beginning to show, a small, secret curve that she'd find herself protectively cradling, without thinking. Andrew, true to his word, was there, his focus entirely on the ultrasound screen, a quiet intensity in his eyes. They were discussing the results with Dr. Wilson when the door to the examination room opened without a knock. An elegant woman in her early 60s, dressed in a Chanel suit that screamed old money and authority, swept into the room. "Andrew, darling, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd—" Her words died as her sharp, assessing eyes landed on Hailey, and then, with unmistakable clarity, on the gentle swell of her stomach. The woman's polite smile froze, cracking like thin ice. "Who?" she asked, her voice dropping several degrees. "Is this?" Andrew's entire body went rigid. "Mother," he said, his voice like chipped stone, "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," Catherine Davis replied, her gaze dissecting Hailey with a look of cold disdain. "I'll ask again. Who is she? And why is she visibly pregnant?" The air in the room became thick and unbreathable. Dr. Wilson, sensing the impending explosion, excused himself with diplomatic haste. Hailey wished the floor would swallow her whole. Andrew stood up, subtly positioning himself between her and his mother, a silent, protective barrier. "This is Hailey Cooper," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "She is carrying my child under a contractual agreement." Catherine paled, then flushed a deep, furious red. "You hired a surrogate?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Without consulting me? Without any regard for our family's lineage?" "I don't need your permission to secure an heir," Andrew shot back, his own anger simmering. "An heir born of a business transaction? You've disgraced the Davis name." The argument escalated, a brutal volley of accusations and long-held resentments. Hailey listened in horror as Catherine spoke of legacy, of bloodlines, of suitable marriages Andrew had rejected, of the constant disappointment he had been to his family. Each word was a poisoned dart aimed at her son. Enough. The single word, spoken quietly but with unshakable firmness by Hailey, silenced them both. She struggled to her feet, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Mrs. Davis," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "I understand this is a shock, but to speak of me as if I'm not in the room? To speak of your grandchild as if he or she is a bad stock market trade?" She shook her head. "That is unacceptable." Catherine stared at her, momentarily speechless at her audacity. "You have no idea who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Hailey countered, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'm talking to a woman who has clearly never told her son that she loves him." The barb hit its mark. Catherine recoiled as if struck. "Andrew may have contracted my services," Hailey continued, her voice softening slightly. "But this baby is not a transaction. This baby is a life. And if you can't see that, then maybe Andrew is right to keep you at a distance." She turned and walked out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Andrew followed a moment later, catching up to her in the hallway. "Hailey, wait. Is she always like that?" Hailey asked, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. "Usually worse," he admitted, a wry, pained smile on his face. He looked at her, his expression full of a new, profound respect. "Thank you," he said softly, "for defending me." "Someone had to," she replied. After the confrontation, Andrew became distant. For 3 days, there were no texts, no visits, no ginger biscuits. The silence was a cold, hollow ache in Hailey's chest. She told herself it didn't matter. It was just a contract. But it was a lie, and she knew it. On the 4th night, he appeared at her door at 10 p.m., looking haunted and exhausted. "Can I come in?" Inside, the dam of his composure finally broke. "My father called me today," he said, his voice rough. "He told me I'm dishonoring the family, that I should have made a suitable match." He looked down at his hands. "He disinherited me." Without thinking, Hailey reached out and took his hand. "Andrew, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he interrupted, his gaze lifting to meet hers. He looked at their joined hands, then slowly, deliberately, placed his other hand on the gentle curve of her stomach. She froze at the contact, the warmth of his palm seeping through her shirt. "For the first time in my life," he whispered, his voice thick with a terrifying, beautiful revelation. "I don't care about their approval. I care about this." His hand moved slightly, a gentle caress over the life they had created. "I care about the two of you, and that scares the hell out of me." They stood there, frozen in a moment of profound, terrifying intimacy. They had crossed a line they had never intended to approach, let alone cross. This was no longer a business deal. It hadn't been for a long time. But neither of them was brave enough to say it out loud. At 24 weeks, Hailey was undeniably pregnant. The gentle curve had become a proud, round belly that she now cradled instinctively. The baby was active, a tiny gymnast using her ribs as a personal trampoline. One evening, she was curled on the sofa when a particularly sharp kick made her yelp. "Ow!" Without thinking, she texted Andrew. "Your son is using my ribcage as a punching bag." The reply was instantaneous. "Can I feel?" She hesitated for only a second. "Apartment 14B. He arrived in 20 minutes, looking uncharacteristically nervous as he stood in her living room. "So, where do I?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward her stomach. Hailey laughed, a warm, genuine sound. She took his hand, a touch that was no longer strange or hesitant, and placed it on the spot where the baby was most active. They waited in silence, and then, thump. A solid, definite kick, directly into the center of his palm. The look on Andrew's face transformed. The guarded billionaire vanished, replaced by a man filled with pure, unfiltered wonder. "That was," he breathed, his eyes wide. "Your son saying hello," she finished for him, her own heart swelling. "Or daughter," he murmured, a slow smile spreading across his face. He kept his hand there, a warm, steady pressure, as more gentle flutters and kicks followed. "They're strong. Like their father," Hailey said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Andrew's gaze lifted from her belly to her face, and the look in his eyes, a raw, unguarded tenderness, made her breath catch. "Or their mother," he whispered. He didn't leave. They ended up on the sofa, his hand still resting protectively on her stomach, watching a nature documentary that neither of them was actually paying attention to. Eventually, lulled by the warmth and the quiet intimacy of the moment, Hailey drifted off, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. Andrew sat perfectly still, not wanting to wake her. He looked down at her, the soft fall of her hair, the peaceful expression on her face, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the impossible, beautiful curve of her belly where his child was growing. And in that quiet, unguarded moment, the terrifying, world-altering truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. "I'm in love with her." The thought was a lightning strike, short-circuiting every defense mechanism he had ever built. This wasn't the plan. This was supposed to be a clean, simple transaction. But there was nothing simple about the way his heart hammered in his chest when she smiled, or the way his entire world now seemed to revolve around the well-being of the woman sleeping on his shoulder. He was completely, irrevocably in love, and he was utterly, royally screwed. Because in 16 weeks, the contract stipulated that this would all be over. She would have the baby, and she would be gone. And he didn't know if he could let her go. When Hailey woke hours later, she was covered with a blanket, still nestled against him. Andrew was in her small kitchen, making tea. "Sorry," she mumbled, sitting up awkwardly. "I literally fell asleep on you." "I didn't mind," he said, bringing her a mug. He sat beside her, the sofa suddenly feeling very small. "Hailey, I need to ask you something." "Okay." "After," he began, his voice hesitant. "After the baby is born." "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. The future she had deliberately avoided thinking about was suddenly right in front of her. "The contract says—" "Forget the contract," he interrupted, his voice intense. "What do you want?" She looked at him, at his amber eyes that no longer hid anything. And she knew the truth. She wanted this strange, improvised family. She wanted to watch their baby grow. She wanted him. But she couldn't say it. What if he didn't want the same thing? I don't know," she lied. Before he could press her, his phone rang, a shrill, urgent sound that shattered the moment. He answered, his face immediately darkening. "When?" A pause. I'm on my way. He hung up, his expression devastated. It's Leah, he said, his voice rough. Cindy just called. There was a complication. We have to go. Now. The floor dropped out from under Hailey's feet. The ICU was a sterile, beeping hell. Leah was drowning in a sea of tubes and wires, a fragile bird in a cage of modern medicine. The opportunistic infection, her compromised immune system unable to fight, had ravaged her body. The doctors used words Hailey didn't want to understand. Sepsis. Organ failure. We've done all we can. Cindy, her eyes red-rimmed, hugged Hailey tightly. She's been asking for you, honey. Hailey walked into the room, Andrew a silent, solid presence at her back. She took her mother's hand. It was cold and frail. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm here. Leah's eyes fluttered open, the effort immense. My girl, she breathed, her voice a mere thread of sound. You're going to get better, Hailey insisted, tears streaming down her face. The treatment was working. Honey, Leah whispered, using the childhood nickname that shattered Hailey's heart. Don't lie. Not to me. She squeezed Hailey's hand with surprising strength. You did more than any daughter should ever have to do. You gave me time. Time to know I'm going to have a grandchild. A faint, beautiful smile touched her lips. I have no regrets. You can't leave me, Hailey sobbed. I did all of this for you. Promise me something, Leah rasped, her gaze drifting to Hailey's swollen belly. Love that baby, no matter what the contract says. You love that child with everything you have. Her eyes then found Andrew, standing respectfully in the doorway. And him, he's a good man. I see the way he looks at you. Don't be afraid to be happy. I can't do this alone, Mom, Hailey cried. You're not alone. It was Andrew's voice, quiet but firm, from the doorway. He had stepped silently into the room. Leah's smile widened slightly. Take care of her, she whispered to him. I promise, Andrew said, and the weight of that promise was absolute. Leah closed her eyes, a look of peace settling on her features. I'm so tired now. Then rest, Hailey whispered, kissing her mother's forehead. I'll be right here. 3 hours later, with Hailey holding one hand and Andrew, because it just felt right, holding the other, Leah Cooper took her last, peaceful breath. Hailey shattered. The grief was a physical, violent force, and she collapsed into Andrew's arms, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. He just held her, a solid anchor in her storm, his hand protectively rubbing her back as she cried until she had nothing left. The funeral was a small, simple affair. Hailey, 27 weeks pregnant and numb with grief, stood by the graveside, her black dress stretched taut over her belly. Andrew never left her side. When it was over, they were the last ones left in the quiet cemetery. She was all I had, Hailey said, her voice hollow. Now I'm completely alone. Andrew turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. No, he said, his voice fierce. You are not. He placed his hands on her stomach over the life they had created. You have him. Or her. He met her eyes, his own gaze filled with an emotion so raw and powerful it made her breath catch. And you have me. The contract, she started, the words a bitter reflex. To hell with the contract, Hailey, he exploded, his voice cracking with a passion she'd never heard. Do you think I still care about that damn piece of paper? Do you think any of this is still just business to me? Then what is it? She challenged, her heart pounding. He stared at her, a universe of unspoken words in his eyes. He was about to answer, to finally say what they both knew to be true, when she cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. She looked down. A dark, wet patch was spreading on her dress. Andrew, she whispered, her eyes wide with a new, more immediate terror. Something's wrong. The baby. He didn't hesitate. He swept her into his arms, his own face a mask of fear. Hospital. Now. As he raced through the city, a single thought pounded in Hailey's head. 27 weeks. It's too soon. Please, God, don't let me lose this baby too. The next few hours at the hospital were a blur of beeping monitors and hushed, urgent conversations between doctors and nurses. Premature labor, Dr. Wilson explained, his usual calm demeanor now tight with concern. Likely triggered by the extreme stress. We're going to try and stop it with medication, but at 28 weeks... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The drugs they gave her made her body tremble, her heart race, but the contractions, after a brief, taunting lull, came back with a vengeance. Hailey gripped Andrew's hand, her knuckles white. "I can't lose him," she cried, the words torn from her. "You won't," he said, his voice a fierce, desperate promise. "I won't let you." But they were no longer in control. A nurse checked the monitor, her expression grim. "The baby is in distress. His heartbeat drops with each contraction." "Doctor," Wilson made the call. "We can't wait. We have to deliver. Now." Everything became a chaotic rush. Hailey was being wheeled down a hallway, the ceiling lights a series of white flashes above her. She saw Andrew trying to follow, his face a mask of helpless terror. "I need to be with her," he argued with a nurse. "I'm sorry, sir. It's an emergency C-section. It's not possible." He was being held back. The last thing Hailey saw before the doors to the operating room swung shut were his eyes, wide with fear and a desperate, unspoken love. He was mouthing something to her, words she couldn't hear but understood completely. "Come back to me, all of you." Then the doors closed, and she was alone. Hailey surfaced slowly, fighting her way through a thick, syrupy fog of anesthesia. The first sensation was a dull, sharp ache across her abdomen. The second was a profound, terrifying emptiness where a life had been growing. Her stomach was flat. Panic, primal and absolute, clawed its way up her throat. "My baby!" she cried out, her voice a raw croak as she tried to pull herself up, tangling in a web of IV tubes. "Where is my baby? Hailey, calm down! You're okay!" Andrew was there in an instant, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face etched with exhaustion and fear. But he was smiling, a real, watery, beautiful smile. "It's okay. They're okay." "They?" she whispered, the world tilting on its axis. "Twins," he said, his voice filled with a breathless, disbelieving wonder. Dr. Wilson said Leah was positioned directly behind Matthew on every scan, a perfect little shadow. He called it a 1-in-a-million chance, but here they are. A boy and a girl, Matthew and Leah. He had named their daughter after her mother. The gesture, so full of quiet love, shattered her heart all over again. "They're small," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But they're fighters." He helped her into a wheelchair and took her down the quiet, sterile hallway to the NICU. And there, in 2 separate, glowing incubators, lay the 2 smallest, most perfect human beings she had ever seen. Matthew Andrew Davis, 4 pounds, 2 ounces, and Leah Brenda Davis, 3 pounds, 15 ounces. They were a tangle of tiny limbs and delicate wires, but they were alive, breathing. Theirs. "Can I touch them?" Hailey whispered. Her voice choked. A nurse with kind eyes nodded. Through the portals, a gentle touch is encouraged. Hailey reached a trembling hand into Leah's incubator, her fingers brushing against an impossibly tiny hand. The baby's fingers, no bigger than a grain of rice, instinctively curled around hers. A sob broke from Hailey's chest, a sound of pure, overwhelming love. Beside her, Andrew was doing the same with Matthew, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "They're perfect," he murmured, his voice cracking. "They're perfect and they're ours." The next few days were a roller coaster of hope and fear. Matthew, the stronger of the 2, improved steadily. But Leah struggled, her premature lungs fighting for every single breath. Hailey and Andrew lived at the hospital, moving between the 2 incubators like satellites, Their world shrunk to the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the fragile rise and fall of their children's chests. One night, sitting exhausted between the two incubators at 3 a.m., and Hailey finally asked the question that had been hanging between them since her water broke. "What do we do now, Andrew? About us?" He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "I tear up the contract," he said, his voice low and certain. "We make this real. You, me, Matthew, and Leah. A real family." "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if it does?" he countered, turning her to face him. "Hailey, look what we've created." He gestured to the two tiny fighters in their plastic wombs. "They exist because we chose this. We chose to risk everything. So choose again. Choose me." She looked at this man. The cold, calculating billionaire she had met months ago was gone, replaced by the father of her children, the man who had held her as her world fell apart, the only person she wanted by her side for the rest of her life. "Yes," she whispered, tears of her own now falling. "I choose you." He leaned in and kissed her, their first real kiss, not born of a transaction or unspoken tension, but of a shared, profound love forged in fear and hope. As they pulled apart, a nurse was smiling at them from the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Leah's breathing has stabilized. She just turned a corner." She winked. I think she felt that. The next few weeks saw Leah improve exponentially. Finally, 6 weeks after their premature birth, Dr. Wilson gave them the news they had been praying for. "Matthew and Leah can go home." Home. Not her apartment, not his penthouse. A house. A real house with a garden in a quiet neighborhood that Andrew had bought, and that Hailey had from her hospital bed designed the interiors for. As they were preparing to leave the NICU for the last time, their two tiny miracles bundled securely in their car seats, Andrew pulled her aside. "I have one more question," he said, and before she could even process it, he was down on one knee, right there in the middle of the hospital hallway. He opened a small velvet box. "Marry me, Hailey," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For real this time. Not because of a contract, but because I love you, and I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life." Laughing and crying all at once, Hailey gave him the only answer there was. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. The first weeks at home were a beautiful, chaotic symphony of life. 2 premature babies meant feedings every 2 hours, a mountain of tiny diapers, the constant low-grade hum of parental anxiety, and a level of sleep-deprived exhaustion Hailey never knew was possible. At 3:37 a.m., she'd be nursing Leah, whose tiny mouth latched with a fierce determination, while across the room, Andrew gave Matthew a bottle, his large hands looking impossibly gentle holding the tiny infant. They were 2 ghosts haunting the quiet, moonlit nursery, united in their exhaustion and their overwhelming love. "Will we ever sleep again?" Hailey groaned one night, her head lolling against the rocking chair. "When they go to college," Andrew replied without missing a beat, his voice a low, tired murmur. But he was smiling, that exhausted, utterly besotted smile that had become her favorite thing in the world. "Is it worth it?" she whispered. He looked from Matthew's sleeping face to hers, his eyes soft in the dim light. "It's worth everything." They found their rhythm in the chaos. Andrew, the man who ran a global empire, became a surprisingly adept diaper changer. Hailey, who once designed luxury interiors, now considered it a victory to shower and drink a cup of coffee before it got cold. They were a team, a partnership forged in the trenches of new parenthood. They took shifts. They supported each other through moments of doubt, and they celebrated every tiny milestone with a reverence that felt sacred. Matthew's first real smile, Leah finally hitting a healthy weight, the first time both babies slept for a 3-hour stretch. One afternoon, Mrs. Cindy, the kind nurse from the hospital, came to visit, bringing a casserole and her calming presence. She held Leah, her experienced hands a comfort, "Leah would be so proud of you, honey," she said, her eyes misty. "So proud of the mother you've become." Hailey's eyes filled with tears. Postpartum hormones were a brutal, unpredictable tide. She would have loved them so much. "She knows," Andrew said softly, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she's smiling." 3 months after the twins' birth, the doorbell rang. Hailey opened it, her body instantly tensing for a fight. It was Catherine Davis. But the woman standing on her doorstep was not the icy queen she had met at the clinic. She looked smaller, her usual armor of Chanel and judgment replaced by an air of hesitant humility. "May I come in?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet. Hailey hesitated, then stepped aside. In the living room, Catherine saw Matthew asleep in his swing and Leah being held by Andrew, who had gone rigid at the sight of his mother. "I came to apologize," Catherine said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on her tongue. She looked from Hailey to Andrew. "I was horrible. I was so obsessed with legacy and appearances that I forgot what a family truly is." Her gaze drifted to the twins, her carefully composed expression crumbling as tears welled in her eyes. "They are my grandchildren, and I would like to know them, if you'll let me." Andrew and Hailey exchanged a long, silent look. He squeezed her hand, his eyes telling her it was her decision. "You can try," Hailey said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "But if you ever hurt them, or Andrew, you are out of our lives, for good." "I understand," Catherine nodded, a look of profound relief on her face. "And I accept." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the fragile, uncertain beginning of a long road to reconciliation. But as Hailey watched Catherine tentatively hold her grandson for the first time, she knew that sometimes the willingness to try is enough. The wedding was intimate. They held it in the garden of their home, surrounded by a small circle of people who had become their true family. Dr. Wilson and his team, a tearful Mrs. Cindy, and surprisingly Catherine, who sat quietly in the back row. Matthew and Leah were the guests of honor, sleeping in a bassinet decorated with flowers. When they exchanged their vows, there was no mention of contracts or debts. There was only love. "You saved me when I was drowning," Hailey said, her voice trembling. "You gave me a family when I was alone. I promise to love you and to choose you every single day." "You taught me that love isn't a weakness," Andrew replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's the only strength that matters. You taught me that family isn't an obligation. It's a choice. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. They kissed, long and sweet, sealing their impossible beginning with a promise of forever. The kiss was, of course, immediately interrupted by the sound of 2 babies beginning to cry in perfect, demanding harmony. Andrew and Hailey broke apart, laughing through their tears. It was perfect. It was theirs. The twins' first birthday party was a happy, chaotic mess. Blue and pink balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze. The backyard was filled with friends and laughter, and the dessert table was under constant, sticky-fingered assault. Matthew, now a wobbly, determined toddler, chased after the golden retriever they'd adopted, his giggles echoing through the garden. Leah, more cautious and observant, watched from the safety of the picnic blanket before making her own careful attempt to stand, immediately tumbling onto the soft grass and looking to her mother for reassurance. "They're so different," a friend remarked to Hailey. "Like us," Andrew said, coming up behind her and kissing her temple. He scooped Leah into his arms, and she immediately snuggled against his shoulder. Perfect in their own ways. In a quiet moment amidst the joyful chaos, Hailey stepped back to take it all in. The life she was living felt like a dream she never would have dared to have. A year ago, she was at the bottom of a dark, hopeless pit. Now her world was filled with light, laughter, and the overwhelming, all-encompassing love of her family. "What are you thinking about?" Andrew asked, joining her at the edge of the patio. He had Matthew perched on his hip, a small smear of chocolate cake on the boy's cheek. "About how strange life is," she smiled, her heart full. How a cold, calculated business deal somehow turned into the warmest, messiest, most beautiful family I could ever imagine. Not so calculated, Andrew admitted, his voice low enough for only her to hear. He shifted Matthew to his other hip. I researched interior designers, yes, dozens of them. But when I saw your photo, when I read about your work, your passion for creating meaningful spaces, not just pretty ones, I knew. He met her eyes, his gaze full of a truth he had held back until now. It was always you, Hailey. I chose you before we ever met. And I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into my office and refused to be intimidated. Later that night, long after the last guest had gone and the twins were finally, miraculously, asleep in their cribs, Hailey found Andrew in the nursery. He was standing between the two cribs, just watching them breathe. They've grown so much, he murmured, not turning around. Can you believe that a year ago, they were so small they could fit in the palm of my hand? Hailey came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her cheek against his back. It's terrifying and beautiful all at once, she agreed. They stood like that for a long time, two parents silently marveling at the miracles they had created. Hailey, he said finally. I want more. She pulled back slightly to look at him. More? More what? More kids, he said, a slow, mischievous grin spreading across his face. With you. Not right away. God, no, we're exhausted. But eventually. I want this house to be even louder. I want more chaos. More love. Hailey stared at him, then burst out laughing. You? Andrew Davis, the man who didn't believe in love, wants 4 kids? 5, he corrected her, his eyes dancing. I was thinking 5. You're insane, she laughed, shaking her head. For you, he said, pulling her into a proper kiss. Completely. And for the first time in her entire journey, Hailey realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, truly, deeply, and joyfully living.